First thing I want to talk about with, and this will finish us up for today, is political theology. And prior to this point, a lot of theology related to politics, of course, was thinking about the relationship of church and world. But as far as laying out a Christian theology of politics, this is the first time we begin to see it toward the end of the 4th century. Ambrose had some ideas, but it's really a man named Augustine who is the one who lays out the first Christian political theology. Some people have suggested that perhaps Augustine is the most influential theologian in Christian history after Paul, and that he has made the most significant impact in how a lot of people view Christianity. He was born in the 350s to a Christian mother and a pagan father. There's quite a bit in a variety of his works about his mother, very little said about his father. He's sent off for education, but eventually the money runs out and he returns home. He will record his life, tell his life story, essentially, his life and up to his conversion, in a work called Confessions. It's kind of the first spiritual autobiography. And just recently, Christian History named it as the #1 classic Christian work that changed the world. And so it becomes a very popular work that Christians have read for centuries. Essentially, Augustine, even though he grows up with a Christian mother, lived an immoral life. He refers to himself as a lazy underachiever. It seemed like pleasure, fun, entertainment, that was predominantly what Augustine was looking for. Eventually, he does get some support to go back to his studies, and so he travels to the city of Carthage, where he will engage in his studies, a little bit more focused on his studies than he had been the first time. The first time it was kind of like studies are kind of there, but it's like, let's go out and have fun. Now, still some of that in Carthage. He will take a concubine and will have a child with her. The two never get married, and eventually the relationship will split after he becomes a Christian. In Carthage, he's studying for a career in law. And that's kind of what he wants to do. So rhetoric is a part of that as well. But, a lot of the focus so far in his studies isn't really focused on truth. It's about skill. It's about, right actions and things like that. But the study of Cicero really begins to get him thinking about truth, right, and the search for truth. And what's particularly problematic for Augustine is the issue of evil. And so he grows up in at least his mother's Christian. But here's this issue of evil. Where does evil come from? And so this has kind of discouraged him about Christianity. Because how does the Christian God allow evil to exist? He's also, being trained in rhetoric, he's dissatisfied with the rhetorical qualities of the biblical text. It doesn't seem to him to be a high rhetorical quality. And so he turns to Manichaeism, which we had talked about in the 3rd century. Essentially, to kind of refresh our memories, there are two eternal principles, light and darkness. And they exist mixed in us, right? We have both light and darkness. And the goal of the Manichae is to separate light from darkness and separate the darkness out. And that will draw us back into this principle of light, which for a while helps Augustine with evil. Right? Or if evil, darkness, is an eternal principle that has always existed, that would explain it. Versus trying to say, how does a Christian God who is wholly good create, and then evil is a part of that? And so if evil is not eternal, where does it come from? Right? And so this idea that it's always eternal. But he begins to have doubts about Manichaeism as well. And goes to hear a rather prominent teacher, a man named Faustus. And he believes that Faustus is going to address these issues, but he's dissatisfied with what Faustus has to say. Eventually he will end up in the city of Milan, Right? He's teaching rhetoric at this time, so he's supporting himself, but philosophically, spiritually, he's trying a variety of things. And for a while, he studies Neoplatonism. Now, within Neoplatonism, it was very much the idea of the one, right, the divine, the source of all life. And evil was related to getting further away from that one, right? And so it's God, but not God as a being. Right? And so this helps him a little bit, right? Evil's further away from the source, getting to closer to the source helps take care of that. His mother, though, is still concerned because he's not Christian, and so she encourages him to listen to Ambrose. And Ambrose is going to be preaching, go listen to Ambrose, which he does. But apparently, he starts out going to listen to Ambrose speak just because he's a prominent speaker, and he's well known, and so he wants to take in the rhetorical qualities of Ambrose's sermons. Right? He's not there to be moved by them, he's just there to kind of appreciate them as a rhetorician. But eventually they start to have an impact on Augustine. Particularly, Ambrose was using the allegorical method, where, again, the text is symbolic of deeper meanings. And it was this use of the allegorical method that helps Augustine overcome some of the things that he'd been questioning. And so it provides a way for Augustine to kind of stifle some of the doubts that he had about Christianity. And so he begins to decide that he is going to become a Christian. But he's concerned. Right? And so it becomes a real struggle for him, because if he becomes a Christian, he's going to have to give up rhetoric, right? Because it was pagan rhetoric. He's going to have to give up some other things in his life, and he's not quite ready to do that. And so it takes a while for him to work through this. He hears of some conversions of some influential people that he knows, and ultimately does decide to become a Christian. There's a story of him being in a garden, I believe it is, and he's really kind of concerned about all of this, and he kind of has a copy of the manuscript there with him, a book of the, I don't know if it's an entire copy of the Bible or what, but he hears some children playing nearby outside the garden. He hears them saying, take up and read, take up and read. And so he picks up the book, and that's what kind of, I forget what passage he reads, but that's what convinces him to become a Christian. So he decides, all right, I'm going to become fully Christian. He's baptized, lives an ascetic lifestyle for a while, and also resigns his teaching post. Shortly after that, death strikes Augustine's life and people in Augustine's life. His mother passes away. His son, who had been baptized at the same time he had, right? So his son's kind of been there all along. He dies as well. And there's some other friends that die as well. So Augustine kind of loses a lot of people in his life, all near the same time. And out of that he starts writing, and will write a variety of works. He will become a priest, and then bishop of the city of Hippo, and will become very important in a variety of theological controversies and beliefs of his time. Some of those we'll talk about on Tuesday. However, it's his political theology that I really want to talk about right now. While his political theology is found in a variety of works, City of God is perhaps the one where it's most concentrated and the one that's been perhaps most useful in thinking about Augustine. Essentially, there are two cities, Augustine said. There is the city of God and there's the earthly city. The city of God is built on love, and the love of God. The earthly city is built on love, but it is a love of self. These two are always intermingled, but always hostile to each other. And the city of God and the city in the earthly city do not work together. Eventually, though, only the city of God will remain. yes, there'll be a variety of kingdoms that are representations of this earthly city, but at the end, only the city of God will remain. Human kingdoms rise and fall because of the system that they are based on. They're based on human thinking, human limitations, vices, etc. But there is a strong tie between the church and the world, and this difference is obscured because of the mix. Now, ultimately, this is coming from a situation where we're talking about the fall of Rome. So we're now moving into the 5th century now. So Rome falls, and a lot of pagans blame Christianity for the fall of Rome. Right? Because, well, when Christianity wasn't the official empire religion, we were fine. Right? Now it's the official religion, now we fall. But, Augustine is trying to defend Christianity from it. Another important idea within City of God is the idea of coercion. In the world, of course, coercion exists, and Christians must live in this world of coercion, but they can act as leaven. They can act to transform their culture. But that shouldn't be any sort of triumphalism. Christians can still sin. But when it came to the issue of heretics, how did coercion function? Well, for Augustine, Christian governors, leaders, could use coercion while dealing with heretics. Heretics must be shown the error of their ways, must be convinced of the error of their ways, and that might mean coercion. Now, for Augustine, that meant things like imprisonment, loss of property, those kind of things. But force could be used against heretics. And he bases some of this on Luke chapter 14, verse 26, and in the Latin, compelle entrare. Compel them to come in. Right? In the context, it's the king is giving a wedding feast for his son, and so they go out to the people that have invited, and they don't come, and they go out and find people in the streets, and the king comes in, and they say, we've done what you've asked, and there's still more room. Right? This is Luke's version. And he says, well, go out into the streets and compel them to come in. And so Augustine took that as, right, you can force heretics to give up their heresy. In fact, it's the duty of the human governor to be used in this case. Right? The common good and it's the good of the people to coerce heretics to the true faith. This will serve as the justification for the Inquisition. And this idea of using force against heresy. Although with the Inquisition, death and torture will be added to the range of punishments that are considered acceptable. Also important out of Augustine is just war theory. And this will become an important concept for Christian political thinking, even up to the present. When is it righteous to go to war? What acts are righteous in war? That's what we're talking about with just war theory. And this is essentially, Augustine is really the first one to kind of attempt to lay this out. Prior to this time, of course, there is no governor or Christian emperor or whatever that can call for a war. So now we're dealing with a situation where how does war fit in with Christianity? Well, war will not disappear, right, for Augustine. But as Christians, we desire peace. But although we desire peace, we find struggle. You have invaders, like the barbarians that are at the gates of Rome. You have heretics. All of these things are causing struggle. And so war will come. So the appropriate thing for Christians to ask is how to behave and when in war and how to go to war. So, what are the right reasons to go to war? Jus ad bellum. It's just to war. What are the acts that are appropriate in war? Jus in bellum. And so this idea of what to do. War is just, says Augustine, when its intent is just. And so what's the intent? Is it to bring about peace? Then it's a just war. If the objective is just, right, something that's trying to be accomplished, if it's a just goal, then that's a just war as well. If your disposition is just, right, how you're engaging in war, are you acting out of love? Acting out of love to go to war. Well, what Augustine said is there's a difference between the inward disposition versus the outward action. So yes, you may be acting violence on the enemy, but it should be coming from a standard of I'm loving you, and so I'm having to use things to, or I'm loving other people, and I'm having to use methods to protect other people or to stop what you're doing. Right? And so the idea is that even though you're acting violence, you could still have a just interior thought. War is just when it's under the authority of a rightly ordained ruler. But that also meant that Christian soldiers should even obey pagans. Right? And so if this person has come to the throne appropriately, right, God establishes authority, so that's a rightly ordained ruler, and so you should obey their order. War is just when its conduct is just. Things like not using extreme violence, engaging in atrocities or ambushes, or engaging in massacres. Those kinds of things were not just. But a war could be just on one side only. You could not have a just war where both sides are just. Eventually, this will develop into a variety of codes of war in Christian thought. And things like who determines when and how to go to war. What can officials do? What can private citizens do? Can private citizens decide to go to war? Well, Christians will say no, and only a rightly ordained leader can decide that. How do ministers fit into that? How do monks fit into that? And so all of these things will develop out of this, this changed situation. Now that you have a Christian government, one of the things you have to deal with is war. Questions or comments? All right, we'll close there for today, and we'll pick up on Tuesday with doctrinal developments in the 4th century. Don't forget, the primary source essay, the second one, is due tomorrow by the end of the day. So make sure to consider